Good morning, good day, and good evening. Welcome to today's Stats Café on making headways in disaster-related statistics. My name is Rikke Hansen, and among other things, I oversee ESCAP's work on disaster-related statistics. Now, disaster-related statistics is a topic that has gained prominence during the past 5-8 years. Initially, an attention that was generated by devastating disasters all over the world, but particularly in the Asia-Pacific region. The agreement in 2015 on the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction attracted much attention, and with its accompanying monitoring framework, it also gave us all a common reference in the form of indicators to develop statistics related to disaster. Now, lately, during the past year, almost year and a half now, the COVID-19 pandemic has again reminded everyone of the importance of more, better, and internationally comparable statistics related to disasters. Now, the disaster expert community has always worked with data to help respond to disasters, to ensure affected people got the support and help they needed. But until recently, the official statistical community was not involved at all. And we saw with a shift in attention from immediate response to disasters towards long-term disaster risk reduction, the need for statistics and statistical expertise to get into the mix has just increased and made it very evident that the statistical community can and should contribute. Today's Stats Café will showcase recent efforts and advances achieved through regional cooperation platforms, and will discuss the important roles which can be played by national statistical offices, national disaster management agencies to improve disaster-related statistics in support of disaster management and disaster risk reduction efforts in Asia Pacific and beyond this region as well. So it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator of today's cafe. His picture now is on the screen. Many of you would have had the pleasure to see or interact with him before. His name is Pucci Puggiono, and he's currently working with ESCAP as a senior advisor to a technical working group on disaster-related statistics in Asia and the Pacific. He's also chairing a task force in Indonesia on disaster statistics and the environment of the Indonesian Statistics Society. And this is a body that provides oversight to the national statistical system of Indonesia, among others in developing the Indonesia One disaster data. Now, previously, Pucci worked with the United Nations in a number of different positions and capacities, but always advising on disaster risk reduction, disaster management, disaster emergency and humanitarian response more broadly. And in those capacities, he's been working with countries all over the Asia-Pacific region. Pucci also holds a PhD in public administration from the University of the Philippines. And before I hand it over to Pucci to run the show, let me just remind all of you that unless you have the floor and are speaking, we very much appreciate if you could mute yourself and also switch off your video. So with that, I wish for some good discussion over the next hour, hour and a half. And Pucci, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rikke. Colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And Rikke, thank you for the generous introduction. I would like to welcome you all to this Stats Café this afternoon. Just sound check. Do you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Then I'll move on. So the purpose of the session today is really just keep us updated of what's going on in the region as well as globally from different experts. And we hope that you will get away with a better understanding of what has been moving with regard to disaster statistics. As Rike said, it's becoming, gaining more prominence now and becoming an important undertaking. But also, I have to say that many, if not most of the countries in Asia Pacific, are still looking for the proper form, the configurations, and the momentum to move forward. So in that sense, this session will be very important. There are two segments to this session. First, we will hear from some experts on the status of the cooperation on disaster statistics. After that, we'll give you a brief question and answer. And on the segment, we have two other presenters who will then also share some of their perspective from more sectoral, angles, and we could have further discussion. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce very quickly two speakers that will start sharing with us. The first one is Maria Talento. She is the statistician from the Statistics Division of ESCAP. She has been the shepherd or the Sherpa, wherever you call it, to the development of disaster statistics in the Asia Pacific. The second speaker is Michael Nagy. Michael is my colleague for a couple of years now, where we run parallel the expert group on disaster statistics in Asia Pacific, while Michael is managing the same process at the UN Economic Commissions for Europe, right? And these two works has been converging into what is now become momentum for disaster statistics, among others. And the third one, a colleague from United Nations Disaster Reduction Office, Mr. Timothy Wilcox. He is a program management officer at the UNDRR Regional Office for Asia and Pacific. Likewise, Tim also a fellow, colleague who have been doing this for a couple of years now. So let me go to the first one. I would like to invite Maria to present a perspective from Asia Pacific, please. Maria, please.
Yeah. With everybody's permission, I would like to just turn off my camera because I'm having some connectivity problems in my area. So if you would allow me. So Ian, can you please share my screen? Okay, so for this morning, I'll be discussing about the progress in capacity building efforts to advance disaster-related statistics in Asia and the Pacific. So by now, it is already well known that the development of the disaster-related framework is over, and now there needs to be a shift from the normative work to actually start producing statistics using this framework. And this is by way of establishing the TWG on disaster-related statistics that will serve as a platform to set the stage for this work. So the modality of this TWG is to function as a community of practice, and where it is more focused on action and more practical aspects and action-oriented, and making sure that the work of the group is aligned with national priorities, Sendai framework, and the SDGs. The TWG was established last year, and by far we have registered 89 members of the group, but we have actually 45 active members. So ESCAP support comes in the way of facilitating meetings, discussions, and it has already also established the Confluence platform as a workspace for collaborating and discussion, and with features that will allow interaction and feedback among members. So so far, we've had 6 monthly meetings, and it has become the venue for sharing of good practices and basically knowing what's going on in the region in terms of the state of producing disaster-related statistics. So for this morning, I'll be just walk you through the developments towards implementing and producing disaster-related statistics. So in this slide, to make sure that the priorities of this group matches with the expectations and what the TWG members actually feels are their particular challenges, the Secretariat of the TWG conducted a survey around working on a proposed framework around 4 areas, which is on the area of enabling environment, production, sharing, and utilization of disaster statistics. So the results of this one would provide the basis of the work of the TWG and will also become the basis for the documentation of a regional situation analysis report. So we conducted a survey among the members of the group that is in terms of a questionnaire, in terms of personal discussions and interviews among selected countries to capture the state of disaster-related statistics in their countries, which are built around these 4 areas using this framework. And the first would be in terms of enabling environment and basically asking questions outright. For each member, they were asked like, what form do you have in terms of legislation policies in place? And then the answers were in the terms of actually having ideal situation. Like in the cases here that policies are in place, so that means it is converging. So if a country has this type of enabling environment, we gave him a score of 4, being the highest. And the different countries are in the different states of this enabling environment with like setting scores like 3, like they have legislations or policies in place, but they're not integrated into policies, they're just interacting. And number 2 would be like just using it as cross-referencing, and 1 would have no weak connection. So, and the same also goes through with the other areas, and this is in terms of their advancement in data compilation, with 4 getting the highest score of having standardized compilation, 3 having regularized and ad hoc, and 1 being the most fragmented. With regards to data sharing, the ideal state would be that data are shared among agencies in terms of interoperability, and the other would be in terms of having a different level of data sharing, like they are in different forms, but having interchangeable forms. Some countries, they share their data under only certain circumstances, and for some countries, they're not accessible to non-disaster related agencies. And it is also based on the fourth area, which is whether data is used for disaster management and development, with 4 being the highest, and that the data is used for setting up policy, budgeting, and reporting. And the 3 would be they're just used for development planning, or the second would be disaster risk management, and the least score would be having data used for emergency responses only. Next slide, please. So based on the results of the survey, so we got a total of 17 responses from 17 countries. So, and you can see here in the graph, we have put together the 4 areas in the graph. The blue tells us on the area of convergence of disaster management and statistical policies, the red being the data collection and compilation, the yellow being data sharing mechanisms and data utilization. So if you put the countries side by side using these four indicators and using the weights that we have used in the earlier slide, we can see here that Indonesia by far has the highest score, having the most ideal situation in terms of these four areas mentioned. And this is followed by Thailand, Philippines, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. So we can also analyze each component by country. And we can see here that for the Philippines, for example, it is very strong in policies, but not so much in terms of data collection and even less for the data utilization of disaster-related statistics. And it also shows us which areas some countries that need support and strengthening, such as those for Bhutan, Mongolia, and Vanuatu. So they would really need support in terms of statistical policies, data collection, and data sharing mechanisms. So the results of this survey is just not really to make a comparison across countries, but just to show you the situation based on those that we captured information provided by our members. So it doesn't really capture everything that's going on in the region. So next slide, please. So as a result of this survey, we will now be able to come up with a regional situational analysis report, which the TWG will come up in a short while. And but this situational analysis report would only cover select countries, so that because we would like to have a certain acceptable level of depth in terms of the analysis, and also taking into consideration the regional balance and the spread in Asia and the Pacific. So for this situational analysis report, we have included countries like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, that would represent South Asia, Indonesia representing Southeast Asia, Georgia, Central Asia, Bhutan representing the landlocked region, and Fiji representing the South Pacific. So you can see here in the slide the status of the indicators by each country identified in the framework, and this will be articulated further in the regional situational analysis. Next slide, please. So for my last slide and for the next steps, taking into account the TOR of the TWG, the interaction between members of the TWG, the conduct of the survey, and the personal discussions with some countries, we have put together at this point a draft strategic plan of what we need, what we felt is required to support the countries to be able to establish and produce disaster-related statistics, and also finding ways on how the members can benefit from this TWG. So in here, I've just put together the three columns. The first area being the priority areas from this group that they have presented and as priority. And the second column is the current status of the areas concerned. And the target, the third column is the target, and this would be the ideal situation that we would like to envision after 5 years of the TWG. So the first item is strengthening the statistical, the members' technical capacity. So the present status is that there is none or very limited capacities exchanged through the TWGs. So that as a target, we aim at the end of the 5 years is that the technical capacities of the members will be strengthened and they are augmented in the various capacities, strengthening modalities, that is in terms of the e-learning, thematic trainings, and experience sharing, exchange, technical assistance, tools, and implementation sharing. So, and right now we have already the e-learning in place at the CIAP. Now, the second area that is deemed very important and a priority of the members is, and also the work of the TWG is contributing towards the development of internationally agreed standards. So currently, we are in the early stage of development of these internationally agreed standards with the current establishment of the global group. So that the ideal state would be that the group can contribute to its global efforts and with which the work of the TWG will provide the basis for the international agreed standards. Because the TWG members are also members of the global group, so that the members will provide to the regions the perspectives of the Asia-Pacific region to the global process. So the third column would be supporting members' governance of disaster statistics. So one of the challenges being faced currently by countries in the region based on the meetings is that the state of governance really varies and differs among countries. Some are in the more advanced stage of development, but the others vary in terms of their relationship between the NSOs and NDMAs. So there are already, there perceived to be a lack of coordination and presence, cooperation between stakeholders that often results in data fragmentation, inconsistencies, and incomparability.
Okay.
So that, so right now, there are already existing frameworks that is available, and that is that of the UN EC Task Force that Michael will be presenting a little later on. And at the end of the year, of the 5 years, so we envision that good practices have already been documented.
1 more minute, Maria?
Yes, I'm through.
Okay.
And we would like to see that good practices are already in place for the countries, and many countries have already developed models. So I think this is all for me, Puji. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Maria. I'm so sorry for being rather, time is really limited. But
Oh yeah,
thank you for
I
sharing
shared
the perspective of
my
Asian. All right.
presentation.
Good. Now I transition to Michael. Michael, good morning. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, Pucci, I can hear you. I had problems to find the unmute myself button. Good to see you.
Okay. All right. Good to see you. And colleagues, as I said, Michael has been a colleague for many years now, and we have been doing work parallel in Asia Pacific and in Europe. So Michael will be sharing the progress on that part of the world, and particularly on the division of labor and the sharing of the responsibilities between NSOs, disaster agencies and other agencies in the countries from the European perspective. Michael, please.
Thank you, Pucci. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, I can see the screen.
Presentation mode, it's fine? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, good afternoon, I think, to most of you from Geneva, where it's still early morning. And thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to present in the next 10 minutes a little bit of our work, which I think is of global relevance, even if it was developed by a regional commission. I would like to introduce you to our work on defining the role of official statistics in measuring hazardous events and disasters. So, promise to change to the next slide. Yeah. So this was actually the beginning of our journey at ECE and working on disaster-related statistics, which began actually in 2015 or a little bit earlier than 2015. This work was carried out by a task force. This is the name for our expert groups that we have. And it was based on a so-called in-depth review, which is a product that we regularly produce in collaboration with countries or that are being produced by countries to identify areas, emerging areas, new developments that might be important for further development of guidance. And such an in-depth review was carried out in 2014 by Mexico and some other countries and organizations on the area of measuring hazardous events and disasters. And it concluded that it's important to clarify the role of national statistical offices in providing information on disaster and extreme events. And you will recall 2014, this was the time of the development or finalization of many important global policy frameworks, including the SDGs, including the Sendai framework and so on. So the objectives of the task force were the following four: to clarify the role of official statistics in this area, to identify practical steps how NSOs can support disaster management and risk reduction. So this was the idea to have a kind of practical guide so that NSOs and national statistical systems can step into these roles. To identify main data needs and data sources beyond traditional statistics that is available, and to identify needs for harmonization of classifications, terms, and definitions. And again, when we started this work, this was the time where lots of progress has been made around the Sendai framework in terms of clarifying classifications, terminology, definitions, and so on. And actually, we were operating very closely also with these related expert groups. The task force members were national experts from national statistical offices of several countries, but also very important, we had a strong representation of international organizations, including regional commissions such as ESCAP, for example, which made it easier for us to closely align the different work streams, and in particular to align our work with the important work that ESCAP and its expert group has been done on defining this disaster-related statistics framework. So just a very quick snapshot on and a little bit of a substantive part of the work that we have carried out. We started with an analysis of the potential roles of the national statistical systems in disaster risk management. And actually this was done really complementary, or let's say in alignment with the work that the ESCAP expert group had been doing on the disaster-related statistics framework. You will find a similar presentation in the DRSF of ESCAP. So this is a very simplified presentation, of course, of the different phases of disaster risk management. We know that this is, of course, more complex. This process is run in parallel, but I think for deriving roles and responsibilities, it's important to try to simplify first and then to understand what national statistical systems can contribute. So just a very quick example. So for example, in case of a disaster impact, of course, the national statistics role could be to quickly provide statistics about the affected area, population, economy, environment, and so on, for immediate emergency response. So without further delay, to provide high quality information that comes from baseline statistics. In the recovery phase, it could be important that national statistical systems assess the impact and losses, assessing the rebuilding efforts and so on, based on information that they have available. When we are in the risk assessment phase or prevention and mitigation, the provision of baseline statistics or production statistics on previous disasters and losses are important contributions of the national statistical systems, amongst other roles and responsibilities. But of course, also the links with the international policy areas, such as international reporting to databases and indicator frameworks. I just name here the SDG indicator framework, but you can also consider the important role in producing information for the Sendai framework monitoring. So there's a wide range of roles and responsibilities that national statistical systems and the national statistical offices have to take up. Given the time constraint, I will not elaborate much more on that. I will come back on this a little bit more detail in a second. So actually in June 2019, the Conference of European Statisticians, which is our governing body, represented by the heads of statistical offices in our region and beyond, so it's about 65 countries, they adopted the final product of the task force, which are the Conference of European Statisticians recommendations on the role of official statistics in measuring hazardous events and disasters. We have also printed copies, but of course you can download this document in English, but now also in an informal Russian translation from that link, which is actually behind this blue text in the headline. So the CS recommendations have two main purposes. First of all, to clarify the role of the National Statistical Office and national statistical systems. So following the main objectives of the task force, and to identify practical steps to better support disaster risk management efforts. And now it comes a very important aspect, in coordination with national agencies responsible for disaster risk management. And I think those of you who work in this area know that this is a very heterogeneous area of institutions. So there is often a disaster risk management agency in a country, but there could be a wide range of agencies and organizations actually being responsible for disaster risk management in the countries. And it's also always very important to understand this institutional relationship before defining the role of the NSOs. So what you can find in this document is a recommendation for national statistical offices and the national statistical systems on so-called core roles and tasks. These are the roles and tasks where we said this is where the strengths of national statistical office and national statistical systems are, like production of baseline information, like quality assurance, like regular production of time series. So these are the typical strengths that national statistical offices have, but when they should provide a good contribution to disaster risk management and monitoring and measuring hazardous events and disasters, they might need to identify how to improve these existing areas. And this is the core roles where we think each national statistical office or national statistical system should take them up. Provision of baseline data to produce statistics on exposure and impacts, to support disaster risk management in producing and communicating information, so maybe to translate the relatively complex areas to policymakers or to emergency response authorities. Setting and enforcing quality standards based on the quality standards that are used in statistics. Developing statistics that are internationally comparable. Ensuring multiple use of information, interoperability and transparency, so to avoid that a new silo is being created. So build upon existing statistics, try to integrate information, make it multiple usable. Communication, dissemination, statistics to decision makers, and the coordination of information flows for SDG, Sendai Framework, and other. And then we identified a group of additional roles and tasks. And of course, this is not a complete list, what you can find here. So additional roles and tasks are actually activities that NSOs, national statistical systems, can take up depending on the institutional environment in the country. And we carried out, or we got several case studies from countries, and we could see which different additional tasks NSOs and NSS can take up. This could be, for example, managing collaborative sites for disaster attention. This is something, for example, something that Mexico does. Development and implementation of methodologies for risk assessment could be in the hands of national statistical offices, or providing services for linking of information from various sources. This could be, for example, by managing the geographical information system of a country. This is the structure of the document, and I highlighted it here in bold where the main substance can be found. Of course, the document starts with an introduction. It defines key terms and concepts in full alignment with the terminology and concepts used in the Sendai framework and other important related frameworks. The policy framework. Chapter 4 is about the scope and measurement framework for statistics on hazardous events and disasters, and no surprise here, this is basically referring to the ESCAP disaster-related statistics framework. Then it defines the role of the national statistical system. This is what I just presented in my previous slide. It discusses the key infrastructure that national statistical offices should have available to take up the role. It has some recommendations to NSOs, but also to international organizations to facilitate taking up these roles, and then also a kind of recommendation for the implementation. But very important and very interesting, and this is I think what created lots of interest by users of this document, are the case studies from 11 countries that we have here. So for example, Armenia provided a case study on the emergency protocol they have, which clarifies in case of state of emergency, what is the role of National Statistical Office. And another case, Philippines is one of the countries also represented here today. We got a very nice case study about the Philippine Statistics Authority and the role in disaster risk management. The rest, if you're interested in it, I really recommend you to download the document and to dive into it. This is very, very interesting, the case studies, and I would like to thank all these countries. This is my
Michael, would you share the link later in the chat box?
Yeah, I will put it in the chat box. Actually, it's indirectly, it's behind this CS recommendations, but I will put the direct link in the chat box, Fuji.
All right.
And this is my final slide. So conclusion and follow-up activities, because this has been the work over 4 years, I think, to define and to draft this document and to find also a wide agreement. But of course, this is not all. We also identified lots of possible follow-up activities. But let me conclude. This document has been developed in close collaboration with the ESCAP expert group, and it can be seen as complementary. You find lots of references, and if I recall correctly, in the disaster-related statistics framework, we have also references to our document. It helps national statistical systems and disaster risk management agencies to collaborate and to clarify their roles and responsibilities. And also very interesting, the document was published actually shortly before COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, and where suddenly national statistical offices had to take up new roles, very important roles, in providing important information for managing the disaster. And we got feedback from countries in our region that the document provided really good, useful guidance to find this role very quickly and to provide really the information that was needed to do this. The new mandate of the task force, and I'm almost finished, Puji, kind of outlook what we are doing right now. We got a new mandate for the task force. The task force is now developing implementation guidelines. It contributes to the statistical authorization of terms, definitions, and classifications used in disaster risk management. There are still lots of open questions. We are working on a set of core statistics indicators as a kind of recommendations for statistical office, what should be produced on an annual basis. And very important, we are organizing in cooperation with this interagency expert group, disaster-related statistics and expert forum on 8th and 9th and 10th of June. So you can already mark these dates in your calendars, and more information will be sent out shortly. I will post the link to the document in the chat now, and if there are any questions or comments, I'm happy to respond to them later on. Thank you, Puji.
Thank you, Michael. So stand by, don't go anywhere. And then colleagues, watch out for the links at the chat box. And also, if you have questions, you can ask, post your question in the chat box. Let me move on quickly. Our colleagues, Timothy Wilcox, I was told that he is not available in post. but he has sent a pre-prepared presentation. He is elsewhere, but it's available online to answer questions. Secretariat, could you please share Tim Wilcox's presentation, please?
Hi, I'm Timothy Wilcox, and I'm from United Nations Production. Forgive me for having to present this by video. Where I am at the moment, I'm in a remote location and the connection's a bit unstable and uncertain. So we want to make sure the messaging came through. So we're just doing this presentation, and then I'll take questions live by phone afterwards. So let me just, on that note, let me just share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, so I'm here to talk to you about, today about the Sendai Framework Monitor and give you a bit of an update on things with that. Essentially, I'll give you a bit of an update on the progress so far in the region. There's been some good positive progress there, and to increase your understanding of the new features and, but more importantly, what the role is of the national statistics officers and other stakeholders can play in the SFM reporting, and briefly talk about the new recent hazard definition and classification review with a few recommendations there. So for those of you who don't know, the online Sendai Framework Monitor was launched in March 2018, so it's been around now for about 3 years, and was designed to track national implementation progress of the Sendai Framework for disaster risk reduction. There's about 38 indicators across 7 targets. Some indicators are shared with the Sustainable Development Goals, which is great because it means that there's that harmonization between the two and reduces burden of country reporting on different things. Most of the reporting is led by the National Disaster Management Officers here in the region, but we encourage them to collaborate with other ministries and partners to collect and report data, in particular the National Statistics Officers, as well as other ministries such as agriculture, education, and health, who often have the information that the NDMO needs to do the reporting. Just very quickly, some reporting milestones this year. The first one here is the 31st of March, which has just gone by, and that's for because they're related to the SDG indicators. The next one coming up is the 30th of September, and that's for targets F and G. And those are specifically on early warning systems and the amount of disaster risk reduction, technical support, and financing going to developing countries, so we can keep track of that. How's the region doing on progress? Well, not too bad. In fact, pretty good. This time last year, there was only about 24 countries out of the 39 in Asia Pacific that were actually using the system. Now there's 34 out of the 39. So we're looking at 87%, which is great. That huge increase has just happened over the past few months and has come from the Pacific, where before it was only about 5 countries from the Pacific that were reporting. Now it's all 14 member states are now reporting through the system. So it accounts for about 1/3 of reporting, which is great. So there's only about 5 countries in the region that are outstanding from using the system. As you can see from this slide, this is where most of the reporting is being done. As you can see, target A and E, where most of the reporting is being done. Target A is about mortality, so the number of people who are dying from disasters or going missing. And target E is about the number of national disaster risk reduction strategies that countries have and reporting those in the system, which is great because we use that to feed at the global level. The weaker ones here are targets D and F. D is more about damage to, education's health centers, disruptions to those. C is about economic loss, from agriculture sector, health sector, education sector. And the reason for that, I think, is because the NDMOs have to get that data from other ministries and partners, and they don't always have ready access to that. So this is why it's really important that they work with partners like the National Statistics Officers to help them get access to that data from these other government ministries. Otherwise, they tend to focus more on A and E and B, which is what they already have in their current data bases. The new SFM features that we've got to help assist countries more are incorporating more explanatory text to indicators. So a lot of the countries said, look, at the moment we're reporting number of deaths, but we had a mega disaster and it's skewing all the figures. We want to put some more qualitative information in about that. So we've listened to the countries on that, and now all the indicators have an explanatory text box that allows the countries to put in more qualitative data, which is good. Another feature is it also allows them to upload supporting documents. Very important. A lot of countries have national disaster risk reduction strategies, but believe it or not, though, they're not always available on the net. So it's hard for people to find. So if they upload them, then people can find, where they are quite easily, including ourselves, and it makes it very much easier. Another good one is that now countries can actually, once they put data into the system, they can actually press a button and the system will actually print off a draft report for them so they can use that for their own national reporting. Another one is that we've done some guidance recently with World Health Organization for countries on COVID-19 reporting through the Sendai Framework Monitor. And that's been very important because we've been getting a lot of inquiries from countries and how they actually report COVID-19 in the monitor. So we've done that. Another key one that we did essentially, as we know, back in 2015, we had these 3 UN landmark agreements, Sendai Framework, Sustainable Development Goals, and Paris Agreement. And all 3 of those highlighted the importance to monitor and review implementation. And, the Sendai Framework broadened the scope of hazards to be considered to natural hazards and human-induced and related biological and environmental risks. And it was found that there was a need for greater consistency in hazard terminology being used. This, even though that there, are a number of existing lists, as well as those being developed in different sectors, there was currently no technical comprehensive overview of all hazards available, which would provide a description of all hazards, within the Sendai Framework context. And in fact, when we actually looked at all the hazards being used in the system, countries were typing in their own hazards, and I think it was something like 1,200 hazards were popping up, different terminology, different languages, different spelling. So this review and the 300 types of hazards identified by the review that are recommended for countries to use will hopefully bring some harmonization to the system. They were basically developed in partnership with a range of UN agencies such as World Health Organization, UNEP, ITU, etc. And over 800 scientists and technical experts were engaged in the review. And this is the first step towards bringing some kind of harmonization, and it's an important reference point for addressing the drivers of risk in a more holistic way by bringing some more consistency to things. So hopefully this will help, and we encourage countries to use this as best as possible. So in conclusion, what are some of the roles of the NSOs and the NDMAs in the region? Well, we really feel that the NSOs have an increasing need to engage with the National Disaster Management Offices to collect and report disaster-related data through the SFM. So we're really trying to make a concerted effort to get the 2 of those organizations together in country and help each other out with reporting on this. This is really important also from a coordination perspective, because we know that, the NDMOs struggle a little bit to get information from other government ministries, from say the Ministry of Agriculture or Ministry of Education, but we feel that the NSOs can help with the coordination of the collection of that information. In many instances, the NDMOs are quite small, particularly in the Pacific. They may only have 4 or 5 people in them, and none of them are actually data experts. So it's really important that the NSOs get involved and actually support them. So that's very important. We hope that they can utilize the recommended hazard wording from the hazard review for SFM reporting. But we really would like to see the NSOs have an official role in SFM reporting. And that needs to be given to them by the NDMO, who are basically usually the lead agency for the SFM reporting in the country. This could be on data entry, for example, like they could be given responsibility for certain indicators. They could be given responsibility for setting up the country profile data, like population size, currency exchange rates, etc., things like that, as well as in setting up the identified hazards in the country for the NDMO to put information on. And again, this coordination data of data collection, I think, is really crucial and is really something that the NSOs can really definitely help and kind of bring everyone together and say, this is what the information we need, how can you help? Another way is to help analyze the data. As I said, many of the people in the NDMOs are not all data experts. So helping them analyze the data and how to use that data, I think, with their work. Okay, like you're collecting information about sex, age, and disability. How do you use that now to inform your response activities and how to inform your risk mitigation activities as well? So this technical support from the NSOs to the NDMOs is very important. It could be training, as I said, increasing understanding of data use, but also importantly, better data management practices. In some NDMOs that are very small, as I said, the information is actually kept on an Excel spreadsheet or it's on hard copy on a file system somewhere. So actually helping the NDMOs with data management practices is also an important thing as well. Helping them understand how things can be set up in such a way to help them manage the data so that when they have staff turnover, they don't have to start all over again. But overall, very important role there for the NSOs and NDMOs to work together. So I'll leave it there. I'm over time, but those are my contact details, and I'm happy to take questions next. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Colleagues, so there was 3 major presentations from Asia Pacific, from Europe, and from UNDRR. I think the first one was really talking about more of the technical content of the work, building the framework. The colleague from ECE clarifying the roles of NSOs and NDMO. And UNDRR was explaining about how countries are reporting against Sendai indicators. I would like to open very quickly now. If you have any questions that we'd like to pose, just raise your hand, and I will pass it on to you. If you have just a clarificatory question, you can put it in the chat box. Please, anyone? I don't see any question. Well, while you're thinking about your questions, maybe what I could do is to move on to the next speaker. Now I would like to see that there more. Okay, there is one, Madhavan Palan.
Hello? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Thank you,
go ahead.
So I have a question. The thing is, all these presentations, are they very much related or will be working under UNDRR?
Okay, that's a question. Let me just put it there. Anybody else would like to ask a question? Anybody else? No? While we're waiting, maybe we could pass it on to Maria. Do you like to respond to that? Are all of this arrangement working under UNDRR, or how will it work? Oh, there is Chi Nguyen Thanh.
Yeah.
Chào chị, buổi chiều.
Good afternoon, everybody, and
okay.
I would like to say thank you for your presentation today. They are very useful for us in Vietnam, and I have a question for you. Actually, in Vietnam, now we are collecting the data from the natural disaster and climate change and GHGs, but in some case, we get the similar data for these for some indicators. And can you tell me how to separate each indicator? Because one data, but it belongs to some indicator system.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So that's a good question. Could you turn? Okay, very good. Cảm ơn chị. I will pass it on to Tim later. All right. Is there one more question? Okay, while we're waiting, Maria, could you respond to the first question? Are all of this working under UNDRR? And then I'll ask Timothy to respond. How to distinguish one in Maria?
Yes, well, with regards to the ESCAP work in terms of progressing the implementation of the disaster-related statistics, all the agencies, UNDRR is one of the objectives of actually putting this DWG to produce disaster-related statistics is to make sure that it is also aligned with the Sendai framework. And when the development of the disaster-related framework was being developed, it made sure that it is aligned with the Sendai framework, and also at the same time also aligned with the SDGs. So yeah, so I think it's all put together and incorporated in the work of the TWG and the progress that we're making in towards the implementation of the disaster-related statistics.
Right. I guess it's fair to say that the scope of disaster statistics seems to be much broader than Sendai frameworks per se, and it's useful to have that alignment in the work, right? So that's to Madhavan. Now, Tim, if you're online or following by phone, there's a question. How one would distinguish one indicator from the other when they look rather similar in the content? Are you online, Tim?
Yes, no, thanks. I mean,
excellent, Tim. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think excellent question. I think with the Sendai Framework Monitor, most of the indicators have the ability to be disaggregated at some level. Not all of them, but many of them do. So say, for example, if you're asking the number of deaths in the Sendai Framework Monitor, then you would actually be able to disaggregate that by hazard type. So what hazard, how many deaths have occurred by what hazard? Other indicators are able to disaggregate by, the type of damage being done to what sectors. So say, for example, if $100 million worth of damage has been done, you could actually disaggregate that by, how much damage is done by type of crop, like how much damage was done to rice, or how much damage was done to darlo, or breadfruit, or something like that. And so it does have the ability to disaggregate, but you're right. I mean, looking at the overarching indicators, it's very general, but you kind of have to go a bit more into the system and set it up in such a way that you're able to actually put in sub-indicators, if you will, and the hazard classification system can help identify that in terms of definitions. I hope that answers the question. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. So, in brief, yes, it looks very similar when you go to the lower resolution, but when you go deeper to the sub-indicators, you probably see the differences. Okay, colleagues, let's move on to the next one. Our next speaker is Sara Duarte Valero. She is the Regional Advisor on Gender Statistics from UN Women at the Regional Office in Asia and the Pacific. For other colleagues who have questions, hold on, and then we'll tackle after the presentation. Sarah, are you online?
I am online. Can you hear me?
Sarah? Yes, I can hear you well. So
okay.
Go ahead, present.
Thank you. I'm trying to turn on my video. I don't know if it's working or not. My computer's acting up today. Let me share my screen.
Okay.
Working on it. It's taking a while. Okay. Can you see it now?
I see you, but not your presentation.
Okay. Wonder what's happening.
Yes,
okay.
Now we see it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so thank you so much.
Please stay within the 10 minutes if you can.
Yes, I'll try my best. So thank you so much for having me. I'm going to jump straight into it. I'm going to talk about recent developments and initiatives for integrating gender into disaster and climate change statistics. So first, let me start by addressing this question that I hear so many times, like, why do we need to integrate gender into disaster and climate change statistics? You know, I hear this very often, like, when a disaster strikes, it's both men and women that get affected, right? Like, disasters don't discriminate, so why there is a need? And the answer, just like for every other data, is that we need to integrate gender, because that way we can design comprehensive responses to these disasters, right? So let me give you a few examples. For instance, when we, you know, some of the classic, quote unquote, classic areas of measurements, such as deaths or injuries, right? For instance, if a disaster strikes in an area where women are disproportionately more likely to be working, then disaggregating data would make sense, because we would see big differences between men and female deaths. For instance, like, say disasters, you know, hits a hospital, and because most nurses are women would be disproportionately affected, right? So just an example. Similarly, with the injuries, for instance, we know that women have less access to healthcare, right? So their injuries on women may actually last a longer time or have a harder time recovering, etc. Or the types of care that are available, right? If a disaster happens and, you know, emergency obstetric care facilities are affected, then pregnant women cannot seek emergency care, for instance, if they need it, right? So many different possibilities. The same happens with displacement, for instance. It's possible that a disaster pushes some people to move to a shelter, for instance. So what happens if in the shelter there's no availability of hygiene products, or if there are safety issues in the shelter, right? So that we don't know unless we have the data. Another very important issue from a gender equality perspective is asset ownership, because that affects directly women's capacity to cope, right? So we know that women are less likely to own land. We know they're less likely to have a bank account, and therefore they have a harder time asking for a loan, for instance. So if their livelihoods are affected by the disaster, they will have a harder time coping. Another thing that's quite affected when a disaster strikes, and we know this from like the very little data that we have in the context of disasters for time use, is the use of time gets altered. So for instance, if schools are closed from the disaster and children—
You're losing your voice.
Oh, let me turn off my video. Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you, Sarah.
Okay. Okay. Good.
No, it's yes.
Sorry. Yeah. So if
Yes, go ahead.
the schools are closed because of the disasters and the children stay at home, or if, you know, there are injured people and they need help, it is women that are going to spend the most time caring for these people in the, you know, large majority of cases. So again, this matters from a gender angle. And the same thing for resilience, right? So who's managing the shelters, who's making decisions, or, you know, how many sources of income do people have? All of these things matter for resilience, and they're different between women and men. So it's important to have this data disaggregated. So in UN Women, we have 3 different programs that work on disaster-related support to countries. One of them is the Empower program. This is not a statistics program, but rather a program around supporting countries with capacity building on climate change related issues. From a gender perspective, obviously. So through this program, there's been a series of national dialogues with countries to select indicators on disasters and climate change from a gender angle. There has been also some training to National Statistics Office to calculate some of this and to measure the gender and climate change linkages. And there's been some pilot testing of data, and I'll come back to this in a minute. Then we have the Women Count program. The Women Count program is UN Women's flagship program on gender statistics. And through this program, we've done a number of things in the area of disasters, climate change, and environment statistics more broadly. So we have developed jointly with ESCAP, IUCN, and UNEP a set of gender and environment indicators that includes a number of indicators on disasters. We have developed a model questionnaire for countries that are interested on measuring these connections between gender and the environment, and we have several countries that are already testing it. We're doing some data integration work And we're doing some work with FAO to measure land ownership and secure tenure. So I'll get to all this later. And finally, we have a third project, which is the Building Back Better project, which is about generating resilience data and ensuring the use of resilience data in a number of countries in the Pacific and Southeast Asia. So through this project, we're supporting surveys, we're supporting engendering of existing questionnaires in post-disaster assessment surveys, and we're supporting scenario planning for decision-making using this disaster data. So I'll give you a bit of a kind of like a dive into this set of indicators, for instance. So as I said, we put it together with a number of partners, and we put it together through consultations with National Statistics Office, Ministries of Planning, Ministries of National Disaster Management Agencies, Ministries of Environment, Civil Society, etc. And the reason why we put together this set of indicators is that we had several countries come to us and telling us we need to measure this issue of environment from a gender perspective in order to align with our national development strategies and national priorities, but we don't know where to begin. There are no indicators out there for us to use. So we started this series of consultations to put together a set of indicators, and we drew some indicators from the SDG framework, some from Sendai, some from UNEP IUCN set of indicators, and then some other additional indicators. To the extent possible, we were guided by the RSF, and we tried to select indicators that had internationally agreed methodology. We didn't want to create something new. So we kind of like cluster all these indicators into these 6 thematic areas that you can see in the gray boxes. And we took them for another consultation. And the experts told us that that's great, but that there were some additional areas where they saw some gaps. We needed to find indicators for those gap areas. So we have resolved some of them, but the pink boxes that you see at the bottom of the screen, we still don't have indicators for those areas, like gender-based violence in the context of environment, or environmental related migration, displacement, etc. So by all means, if you have any ideas or know of any indicators that have internationally agreed methodology that kind of like would be suitable, please let us know, because we would love to hear. Now, in connection with this indicator set, we put together a model questionnaire for countries to be able to either run as a standalone survey or to attach to other existing surveys. So these are countries that want to measure these connections between gender and the environment. Any survey is suitable as long as the questions are not asked only to the household head, but rather they're asked to a male and a female in the household, because that's the only way we can capture the gender inequalities, right? There are several modules in this model questionnaire. So ranging from like household characteristics to, housing related issues such as water and sanitation. There's a module on disasters, there's a module on climate change, there's a module on asset ownership and livelihoods that's very related to coping capacity, etc. On top of that, we're putting together an enumerators manual that goes with this, and we are testing data collection for this survey in a number of countries. So Bangladesh already finalized the testing. Mongolia is currently gearing up for testing this. So in the case of Bangladesh, it's been 5 provinces only. In the case of Mongolia, will be a nationally representative survey. And other countries in the Pacific will be doing this this coming year. In addition, we're working with FAO to support data collection on indicator 5A1, which is obviously very related as well. Other work that we're doing in this regard to assess kind of like the connections between gender, climate change, environment, disasters, etc., is we're doing data integration work. So we have integrated GIS data with DHS data to look at some of these connections across many different countries, and we're seeing very similar patterns. So the example that you're seeing on the screen is Bangladesh. And what we see in Bangladesh is that drought episodes are very related with spikes in child marriage. And we see these actually across the board in many other countries. So we are currently expanding the analysis from more countries and more indicators, and we will come back with a paper showcasing some of these connections within the next couple of months. Okay. Now, what is next?
1 more minute, Sana.
Okay, thank you. What is next? We want to continue supporting data collection. We have some resilience surveys planned. Reach out to us if you're interested. We want to continue helping countries end gender disaster survey questionnaires and advocate for data production. And it's very important that once we have the data actually gets used, right? So publishing the data is very important, but also working with governments for scenario planning and decision making, and for data use through monitoring and evaluation, obviously, and working with media to showcase some of the stories. So here in this table, I have put together kind of like some of the key next steps and actions for countries, for government partners who would be interested in mainstreaming disasters or climate change, mainstreaming gender in disaster or climate change statistics, and who would take each of the roles. From if you're gonna select a set of national priority indicators, then it would be for the NSO to co-lead with NDMA and other ministries to weigh in. While if you're thinking about, data collection through surveys, then it would be for the NSO to lead in coordination with NSO. But if you're thinking about data use, then it would be for the different ministries to lead with support from NSO and NDMA. So since we're out of time, I'll stop here. But I'll share the PowerPoint if people want to spend a little more time with it. Thank you.
Excellent. And it goes with your contact in it, right?
I'll add my contact. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Sarah, thank you very much. I'm sorry to rush you up, but stand by for the questions after this. My next guest is my colleague who used to be sitting at the same floor with me, Mr. Amin Samsadini. He is the Program Officer of the Asia and Pacific Center for the Development of Disaster Information, or APDIM. We requested him to share with us what kind of platforms that APDIM have been developing to be shared in the region. Amin, take the floor, please.
Thank you, Puji. Thank you, colleagues. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen in full screen mode?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Today, I would like to talk about the one of APDIM's recent studies on understanding and addressing gaps and needs for disaster risk information and data management platforms in Asia and Pacific. We use the findings of this assessment to design the APDIM strategic working plan for 2021 to 2030. Also, we'll use these findings in the development of APDIM regional risk data platform. Due to the time limitation, I'm present a very compressed version of it, and I hope it encourages you to have a look at the full report, which you can find from APDIM website. At the end of this presentation, I'll share the link. To conduct this assessment, we have done an extensive desk review on the 55 databases and 32 data platforms in regional, sub-regional, and national scale. We also interviewed and filled a comprehensive questionnaire with support of 35 around global and regional players and key institutions in this regard. In national scale, to have a better understanding on the gaps and needs, we selected 4 countries in the region, Bangladesh, Tajikistan, Nepal, and Islamic Republic of Iran, and had interview with the key organization in which National Statistic Organization and National Disaster Management Authorities also was considered. We concluded with 8 findings and 5 suggestions, which I'll show you in the next slide. And it's not only for APDIM, but also for other international and regional institutions that supporting countries with understanding disaster risk for reducing disaster risk and building a long-term resilience. I would like to thank at the beginning the core team of this assessment, Ms. Sarah Safai and Dr. Robert Sudden and Ms. Ava Bahrami. She's attending today's meeting. I also would like to thank all experts who helped us in this review. Since it's a long list, I cannot mention them by name, obviously, but you can find all details in the report. Based on the findings of the assessment, we categorize the findings under 8 categories, which range from the needs at national level for increasing the use of and application of risk information in policy and programs, need to support countries to assess and analyze existing data to or to conduct new hazard and risk assessment where some capacity exists. Countries need for enhancing their own risk data management platforms and governance. At national level, using Sendai framework as benchmark, it exposed significant gaps in the availability of many types of risk information. There are major gaps in hazard and risk data availability for drought and sand and dust storms, which in Aptim we try to help for filling these gaps through 2 other products. I will very shortly name them at the end of this presentation. Transboundary collaboration need the support of regional institutions. Not only at the technical level, but also at cultural level, working cooperation, and political level. Risk information developed by international entities is a very valuable that was acknowledged by all national entities, but there are challenges both at national level for using the information, but also at the international entities also have certain challenges. There is not one central platform for accessing risk data in Asia and the Pacific, and establishing such a platform could benefit national and regional actors. We hear that from many of colleagues, especially at regional level. Suggestion for the way forward. Based on those findings I mentioned just now, we came up with a few high-level suggestions, which I will share here on supporting countries in understanding risk for disaster risk reduction and to improve disaster information management in the region. Facilitate dynamic dialogue, collaboration, and co-design of initiatives and products by convening multidisciplinary teams from national, regional, and international entities. We need to understand people, the system that they function in, the tools and mechanisms that they use, and their incentives. And that's a complex process. It does need multidisciplinary team. If not, it does need collaborative and the co-design way of thinking instead of one direction, either the solution coming from only the science side or coming from the policy side. For the national entities, to enhance national risk data governance, including support such as for designing and setting up legislation that requires data sharing and use of data in certain projects, development of proper protocols and standards, sustainable fundings, governance mechanism, understanding the data needs, and maintaining sustainable demand, and be able to respond to that demand. Issue of security also was raised over and over in our research, and establish a national risk data platform when the required condition exists. Setting a national data management platform obviously is not an easy task. It's not one solution by providing software to one institution in the government and thinking of that the problem is solved, and then now they have a data management platform. It's required whole governance system and mechanism for it to work and the capacity to exist. But many countries already are very close to have that capacity, and they need just some support to set it up. Again, you can find all the details in the report. The third suggestion is to support the national and subnational science and policy stakeholders in conducting risk assessment, understanding risk information, and using it in policy and planning. For this one, I explain more in my next slide. Fourth suggestion is to mobilize global and regional expertise and resources to strategize for closing the gaps in hazard and the risk data available for disaster risk reduction. This is going back to the point, to the findings, and here I'm outlining some of it. We use the Sendai as a benchmark, and based on that, there is a significant gap in availability of many types of this information. Most countries already have some sort of earthquake and flood information, but on the other hazard, there is a significant gap exists. Not much studies and assessment done for displacement at the subnational level and for probable and extreme scenarios. This is extremely useful for emergency response, for shelter planning and recovery planning, information on social economic vulnerabilities and unequal impacts of disaster on most vulnerable groups. There are some studies exist, but not really in the format and with the details that's needed for community resilience planning or for social programs. Also, the required resolution of vulnerability and resilience data to be used in some national and local scale. Majority of DRR and CCA planning are usually happen in local scale, so these data need to be improved. The perception of risk, the culture of risk management.
I hope you're wrapping up, right?
Yeah, just 2-3 minutes is fine.
No, just 1 minute. Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just try to finish my presentation. It would be very useful to think of this whole process of producing risk information all the way to getting to the disaster and climate resilience, which is the main objective, to think of it as a series of chain activities. So starting with production of risk data and information, but then further analysis and creation of knowledge related to that problem, related to that context, and then communicating that knowledge and then using that information and knowledge in policy and planning. The point is that actors, I really want to emphasize that, actors at every one of these steps are different. There are some commonality, and again, with the whole mentality of co-design and collaborative, it's important to have multidisciplinary teams at table at any of these steps. Okay, I think I need to escape this one. It was just an example of using statistical data in one of our other studies, but since this will reach very soon in less than 1 month, so I'll escape this one and just want to promote the guideline we recently published on using Sendai framework for sand and dust storms. Okay, it's the last one. Just is the list of what's based on the review I mentioned, this assessment I mentioned, is the list of characteristics for a good risk data management. So I keep the floor open if colleagues want to add to it in order to help us for improving the data platform we plan to build. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry
Right.
if it takes.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so those were 5 very important presentations updating us on the progress being made on different fronts in Asia Pacific, in Europe, and then in UNDRR, and then in the area of gender, and finally on database and platforms and methodology. Now we have only very brief time for about 5 minutes. If there is any pressing question, you're most welcome to ask those who have not spoken yet. Anyone? It's very precious time that you would like to ask. I have Pa Slamet. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Pa,
Yeah,
please.
thank you. Yes, thank you. It's interesting to hear about the lectures given by the experts. Actually, many questions, but I think this is the last time. I would like to back to Timothy, maybe. Can we? Okay, my question to Timothy is that what the policy of the UN or ESCAP if a disaster happened to a country? How we assist people in disaster? Thank you.
All right. I suppose your question is pertaining to statistics and data, Pa. Is that correct?
Yeah, but yeah, could be. You may delete the question. Okay.
It's not really about giving reliefs or search and rescue, but how the data could help people who are affected by disaster. I suppose that's the question, yeah?
Okay, that's
okay.
My first
Let's keep that to Timothy and others. If there is one more question. If not, I'll pass it on to Timothy. Tim, so the questions. How do the data and statistics help people who are affected by disasters? Tim, over to you, if you're still online.
Yes. No, thanks, Puji. No, look, it's an excellent question. I mean, and to be honest, I think it's really important because, like, let's take people with a disability, for example. If you know how many people in a particular area that have been affected by a disaster who have a disability, then you can actually use that information to inform your responses, okay, to help people in your humanitarian and disaster response in terms of what their needs are. The same as with women, children, elderly people, etc. You can actually use that information to inform, your responses. It also helps inform, recovery efforts. In terms of identifying persons of certain demographics, what their needs are, and it really helps identify, the niche areas of like where you actually need to tailor your response. So it's not just simply about providing, relief to whoever, but it's actually saying, okay, well, this is the number of people we have. These are the persons with disability who may need additional support. These are the number of lactating women, for example, who may need, additional nutritional support with food and things like that. And, by doing that, then you can actually have more accurate humanitarian disaster responses for that very specific community. And it also helps if you can use that information to identify what the needs are before the disaster as well, which is even more important. So yeah, I'm conscious of time, so I'll leave it there, Puji. Yeah.
That's very good. Timothy, thank you very much. And for colleagues, there's an additional information. There is a program that's called Data Preparedness, in which having all of the operational data available at hand. So in the onset of disaster, those pre-prepared data could shorten the time of response, could increase the precision, and also to make sure that the assistance are suitable and appropriate to the needs on the ground. Colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, we have only 2 minutes to go. Chị Thanh, xin lỗi nha. Hết thời gian rồi. That is in English. I'm sorry, the time is up. I cannot give another question. But let me thank all the speakers. Let me thank ESCAP for providing the platform, and thank you for the sharing of the information. Let me wrap up very quickly. First, I think that the disaster statistics become increasingly important in the world that are increasingly integrated. SDGs, Sendai Framework, all are integrated. And not the least is important for national development itself, because now we are accountable quantitatively. We must be able to account how the GDP reduces from the target, for example. Number two, there have been works going on in Asia Pacific, in Europe, and other places where it's advancing in several fronts, at the technical side, and substantive, at the governance side to help you with policies, institutional arrangements, mechanism, and what's not. As well as there are works that are going on to make sure that what we do are aligned with international frameworks and national commitments. Now, the other message that came across in this meeting was that the gender constitutes an important aspect, not only because women are special, they have special needs, but they're contributing factors to the solution as well. So it's good to integrate early in the game rather than inserting it later as we move along. And finally, in the region, there are many, many platforms available. There are methodologies being developed, and there are information available. What we need are platforms that interact to one another, and for us to be more diligently having access to them. Rike, I think that's the best that I can do to recap this thing. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Pucci. And I was just making a note. I don't have to summarize because you did it excellently. So thanks very much, Pucci, for excellently moderating this session. And I do want to repeat your thanks also to our excellent presenters today. Thank you all for the preparations, for nice delivery. And thanks to our participants for the good questions. And I think we could probably continue another hour just with Q&A here because there's been so much put to the table. I do want to end today's session with a message, and that is that even though we would still consider disaster-related statistics as, let's say, an emerging area of statistics because we still do not have internationally agreed standards for this work. I hope it's been made very clear to all of you who've been listening in today that there's absolutely no excuse for not just getting started, because there are numerous tools already available, guidelines, recommendations, e-learning has been developed, and the platforms as well, as Pucci just mentioned, where you all have the opportunity to engage with other experts and learn and exchange. And in addition to the two regional groups we've heard about today, there is also now a global group as again a platform which you can engage on, and this is where the main part of the development of an international statistical standard will take place. This IAEG, globally working under the auspices of the United Nations Statistical Commission. So, an encouragement to all of you: get out there, start working with the data, experiment, and work with colleagues in other agencies. We've heard from most speakers today how important that interagency collaboration is for this to really take off. So good luck ahead to all of you who are enthusiastic about disaster-related statistics, and thanks again for all of you to participate today. So do have a good day, evening, afternoon, wherever in the world you are, and we'll see each other for next week's Stats Café. And to those in Thailand, happy Songkran. Sabai Pi Mai.
Michael, thank you very much. Chị Thanh, cảm ơn nhiều. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.